People ask me, sometimes, what it felt like when the commission finally went quiet. They expect some answer about triumph, about the flush of vindication, about finally being heard after all those years. They don't understand is that silence in a chamber like that one doesn't feel like a reward. It feels like gravity, something enormous settling onto the floor. I retired from the Trade Representation Corps 11 years ago. After 31 years of work, I can only describe as patient. Patient in the way a stone wall is patient, not because it has nowhere to go, because it was built to outlast what pushes against it. I want to tell you about the last thing I did in that room. I want to tell you what it looked like when the Joint Treaty Commission learned that we had kept our records. The commission chamber on Vathara Station was not an impressive room. I want to be clear about that, because in the telling of such things the room always becomes grander than it was. It had long polished tables of dark composite, 11 commissioner seats arranged in a low arc, and windows that looked out onto a maintenance corridor. The Vathara Commission had been established under the Consolidated Reach Accords 70 years before I was born, and in those 70 years it had become what all such bodies become when nothing checks them. A place where the outcome is decided before anyone sits down. I had been testifying before the commission for 9 days. Not consecutively. They had a way of scheduling you in bursts, letting the intervals stretch, letting you feel the friction of their calendar against yours. I was there on behalf of the Terran Reach Directorate, contesting a survey ruling from 8 years prior. The commission had used that ruling to deny us expansion licensing in the Cedral margin. 60, 2-star systems, most of them catalog empty, 2 with hospitable conditions, 1 with resources our economists had spent a decade projecting. The ruling had cited the Terran survey of the Cedral margin as incomplete. Methodologically insufficient, they called it. The original survey data, they told us, could not be verified through commission archives, as the transfer record had been corrupted in a relay incident 4 years after submission. We had accepted this. We had for 8 years accepted this. The survey had been conducted by a team of 41 people over 3 years. I had met 6 of them. I had read every line of their work. They were careful people. They were not the kind of people who leave gaps in their methodology. And they were not the kind of people who lose their records. Which is why, when I was given the floor on the 9th day, I placed a sealed data cartridge on the table in front of me and said nothing. Commissioner Orvahasas, who chaired the session, watched me set the cartridge down. He was a veteran of the old administrative class, long-limbed, slow-blinking, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades in rooms where patience was a weapon. He let the silence extend. He was very good at that. I let him extend it. After a moment, he asked what I was presenting. I told him it was a copy. The original was in a sealed archive on Earth, logged under an independent custodian treaty with 3 non-signatory observers, time-stamped before the relay incident that had supposedly corrupted our submission. I told him that the copy he was looking at was authenticated at 6 independent stations, the nearest of which was 4 light minutes from where we were sitting. I told him the document was the complete Terran survey of the Cedral margin, methodology intact, all 41 researchers credited, with a covering index that cross-referenced every data point to the submitted version. The version the Commission's own relay log showed had arrived uncorrupted. I set a second document beside it. That one was a Commission transfer receipt, dated 19 days after the relay incident they had cited. It confirmed receipt of a full and complete survey package. I did not explain what this meant. I did not ask the Commission to account for the discrepancy. I did not tell them what they had done, or why it was wrong, or what it had cost the 41 people who had done that work, or the economists who had built 8 years of projections on a ruling they were told was procedural, or the settlements that had not been approved, or the families who had not gone where they had planned to go. I closed my folder. There is a sound a room makes when it realizes what is in front of it. Not a sound anyone produces, not a gasp, not a murmur, not the rustle of movement. It is the sound of a collective intake of breath that no one releases. It is the sound of 11 people understanding simultaneously that something they believed had been disposed of is sitting on the table in front of them, logged, timestamped and witnessed, and that they have just made a second record. This session, these documents entered into evidence that will exist alongside the first. Commissioner Haas looked at the cartridge. Then he looked at me. His face was not the face of a man in panic. It was the face of a man who has just understood the shape of a very long mistake. I recognized it because I had spent 31 years learning to recognize it. That particular recalibration behind the eyes when someone realizes the architecture of the situation is not what they thought. He asked if I intended to pursue an archival misconduct finding. I said that was not my purpose in presenting the documents. My purpose was to complete our evidence record. That was all I said. The session was suspended 40 minutes later for administrative review. The review lasted 16 months. I was back in my office in the directorate, handling routine licensing disputes and writing quarterly assessments when the letter arrived. The Commission's formal notification was 11 pages of procedural language that said, in its way, that the expansion licensing for the Cedral margin had been approved, that the previous ruling had been vacated on technical grounds, and that the survey record had been restored to the official archive in full. It did not say anything about the transfer receipt. It did not say anything about the 19-day discrepancy. It offered no accounting of the 8 years, or of the 41 researchers who had submitted a complete survey and watched it declared insufficient, or of what it costs a person to be told their careful work does not exist. I had been a trade representative long enough to understand that this was the shape of how such things resolved. The record would be corrected. The record of the correction would be sanitized. The Commission would continue. I was not naive enough to have expected otherwise. What I had expected was exactly what had happened, which was why we had kept our records. That is the thing I want people to understand when they ask me what it felt like. We had not kept those records as a protest. We had not kept them as a threat, or as leverage, or as the setup to some eventual confrontation. Kept them because careful people document their work. We kept them because the 41 researchers who spent 3 years in deep survey conditions trusted that what they submitted would be received and held and treated with the weight it deserved, and that if it was not, someone would notice. The Commission had made one error, not the falsification. That was a choice, and choices are not errors. The error was the assumption about how long a thing needs to survive before it becomes inert. They had done what institutional bodies do. When they want something to disappear, they had waited for time to do the work. They had waited for the survey team to move on, for the economists to redirect their projections, for the directorate to absorb the ruling and pursue other margins. What they had not accounted for was that we do not clean our houses on their schedule. I keep a copy of the covering index in a drawer in my office. Not the cartridge, the physical index, printed, signed by every member of the survey team. I look at it sometimes, not out of bitterness and not out of pride. I look at it because it is the record of 41 people who did careful work and trusted that it would be remembered. We remembered it. That is all we did in that room. We set the record on the table and waited for the Commission to understand what it meant that we had kept it. We did not tell them what they had done. We did not ask them to account for themselves. We gave them the silence to hear the sound of what they were looking at. The Commission continued to function. It still does, as far as I know. Particular commissioners who sat in that arc on Vethara Station have, for the most part, retired or been reassigned. The institutional body persists as institutional bodies do. None of that troubles me. What matters is that the survey record now sits in the official archive, where it was always supposed to sit, and the 41 researchers who produced it are credited in full. And the 3 years they spent in the Cedral margin are not a corrupted relay file but a completed work. That was the purpose. That was always the purpose. In 31 years, I never found a more effective argument than that.